I am Isabella, 35 years old, a data analyst at a tech firm earning $160,000 a year. Every dollar I had saved, every investment I had made, it all came from my own grit and determination. That Thanksgiving morning, as I stood in my apartment gripping my packed suitcase, a familiar dread tightened in my chest. I was headed to a family reunion at the Rosewood in Miramar Beach, Florida, a sleek coastal resort. It was our annual tradition, but that year the air felt tense, like a fuse waiting to ignite. My parents had always favored my brother, pouring their affection on him while I was left in the shadows. He had a wife, a kid, and a lavish lifestyle he hadn't earned. But when I arrived and was told there was no room for me, my brother sneered. "The room is for me, my wife, and my child. We're the real family." That was the start of a chain reaction. I simply replied, "Enjoy it," and walked away. Hours later, after ignoring dozens of their frantic calls, something unthinkable turned their world upside down. Before we dive into the story, tell me what time it is and which city you're watching from. And stay tuned until the end to see the truth that left my entire family stunned. As I zipped up my suitcase that Thanksgiving morning, a weight settled in my stomach heavier than the luggage in my hand. I stood in my Seattle apartment staring at the neatly packed clothes, knowing the trip to Florida would stir up old wounds. My brother had always been the golden child, the one my parents propped up while I fought for scraps of their attention. Growing up, I watched them shower him with praise for every minor achievement: his high school football games, his rushed wedding, even the birth of my niece. Meanwhile, my straight-A report cards and late nights studying for my degree barely earned a nod. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a wall between us built brick by brick over years. My brother's life screamed excess. He ran a failing restaurant in Miami, propped up by my grandmother's monthly checks, $30,000 wired without fail. His wife spent her days curating a perfect image on Instagram, posting about designer bags and private school fees for their daughter. I scrolled through her posts sometimes, not out of envy, but disbelief. How could someone live so recklessly, banking on someone else's wealth? My parents weren't much better. Retired and living in a high-end assisted living facility, they leaned on my grandmother's money for their medical bills and golf club memberships. I had learned early on that relying on others was a trap. My grandmother, the only one who saw my worth, taught me that. When I was 16, she sat me down with a ledger showing me how to budget, invest, and stand on my own. "Don't let anyone own you," she had said, her voice firm but warm. Those lessons shaped me, pushed me to build a career where I answered to no one but myself. Packing for the trip, I couldn't shake the memory of last year's reunion. My brother had bragged about his new boat bought with my grandmother's money while my parents beamed. I had mentioned my promotion, a step up to senior analyst, and they changed the subject to my niece's piano recital. It stung, but I swallowed it like always. This time, though, something felt different. My brother's recent texts had been sharper, almost territorial, hinting that I didn't belong at the reunion. "It's a family thing," he had written once, as if I were an outsider. I pushed the thought aside, checking my flight details to Florida. My grandmother would be there, and her presence always grounded me. She had a way of seeing through the facade, cutting through the noise with a single look. I slipped my laptop into my carry-on, thinking about the work I'd return to after the trip. My job demanded focus, and I loved it for that. Numbers didn't lie or play favorites. They rewarded those who paid attention. Unlike my family, my career valued my effort. But as I locked my apartment door, a flicker of unease hit me. I had a feeling this reunion would test more than my patience. My brother's entitlement, my parents' blind loyalty to him, it was a powder keg, and I was walking into it. I took a deep breath, grabbed my keys, and headed for the airport, unaware that this trip would change everything. When my plane touched down in Florida, I felt a mix of exhaustion and unease, the weight of the trip pressing harder than the suitcase I dragged behind me. The rosewood in Miramar Beach loomed ahead as my taxi pulled up its sleek glass facade, catching the late afternoon light. The air buzzed with the polished energy of wealth guests in tailored outfits, staff gliding with practiced smiles. But beneath it, I sensed a brewing storm. This was no ordinary family reunion, not with the history I carried. I stepped into the lobby, the cool air a sharp contrast to the humid warmth outside. My parents were already there, standing near a marble fountain, their faces lit with the same forced cheer I remembered from childhood. My father adjusted his glasses, glancing at me briefly before looking away. My mother clutched her purse, offering a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You made it," she said, her tone clipped as if my arrival was an inconvenience. I nodded, swallowing the familiar sting of their detachment. They had always been this way, distant with me, warm with my brother. I scanned the lobby, expecting to see him or his wife, but they were nowhere in sight. Probably off flaunting their lifestyle, I thought, picturing his wife's Instagram posts of curated perfection. I approached the check-in counter, my reservation confirmation pulled up on my phone. The clerk, a young woman with a polished name tag, typed quickly, her brow furrowing as she scanned the screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice hesitant. "There's no reservation under your name." My stomach dropped, but I kept my composure, asking her to double-check. She did, her fingers moving faster, but the result was the same. No room. No record. I stepped back, my mind racing. My parents had handled the bookings as always, using my grandmother's account. How could they have left me out? I turned to my parents, who were now whispering to each other, their eyes avoiding mine. "There must be a mistake," I said, keeping my voice steady. My father shrugged his hands in his pockets. "We booked for the family." He muttered, his words vague but heavy with implication. My mother looked down, fussing with her purse, refusing to meet my gaze. The truth hit me like a cold wave. This was no accident. My brother's family, his wife, his daughter had a suite, no doubt. I could picture them settling in their luggage, already unpacked, while I stood here, erased from the plan. I clenched my phone, fighting the urge to call my brother right then. Instead, I asked the clerk to check under my parents' names. She confirmed their reservation, along with one for my brother's family, a sprawling suite with ocean views. My name was nowhere in the system. The clerk offered to find a room, but the resort was fully booked for Thanksgiving. "We can put you on a wait list," she said, her tone apologetic. I shook my head, a bitter taste rising in my throat. My parents stood silently, their lack of defense louder than any words. They knew. They had chosen. I took a deep breath, my mind sharpening. I wasn't going to beg or make a scene. Years of being sidelined had taught me to hold my ground without breaking. I thanked the clerk, picked up my suitcase, and turned to my parents. "I'll figure it out," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. They exchanged a glance, but neither spoke. As I was still standing in the lobby, my brother Timothy emerged from the elevator, his wife and daughter trailing behind. He wore a tailored blazer, his smirk as polished as the marble floor beneath us. His wife adjusted her sunglasses, her designer bag swinging with every step, while their daughter clutched a stuffed toy, oblivious to the tension. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their silence deafening. I tightened my grip on my suitcase handle, waiting for someone to explain why my name was missing from the reservation list. Timothy sauntered over, his eyes flicking to the clerk before landing on me. "What's the holdup?" he asked, his tone dripping with impatience. I opened my mouth to respond, but the clerk spoke first, her voice unsteady. "There's no room booked for her," she said, gesturing toward me. Timothy's smirk widened, and he crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "That's right," he said, his voice loud enough for the lobby to hear. "The room is for me, my wife, and my daughter. We're the real family here." His words cut deep, each syllable a deliberate jab. My parents stood motionless, my father staring at his shoes, my mother twisting a ring on her finger. Their refusal to speak confirmed what I had always known: they had chosen him again. I felt heat rise in my chest, but years of swallowing their disregard had taught me control. I looked Timothy in the eye, my voice steady. "Enjoy it," I said, the words sharp but calm. His smirk faltered for a split second, but he recovered, shrugging as if my presence was irrelevant. His wife gave a small, satisfied nod while my parents avoided my gaze entirely. The clerk fidgeted, offering a sympathetic glance, but I was done. I turned on my heel, pulling my suitcase toward the exit. The weight of their betrayal pressed against me, but I refused to let it break me. Outside, the humid Florida air hit me as I flagged down a taxi. I slid into the back seat, directing the driver to the airport. My phone buzzed texts from my mother, vague apologies mixed with excuses, but I ignored them. I didn't need their words. I needed distance. As the taxi pulled away, I dialed my friend Julia, the one person who always understood. She picked up on the first ring, her voice warm but concerned. "What happened?" she asked, sensing my mood. I recounted the scene, Timothy's cruel declaration, my parents' complicity, the clerk's helpless shrug. Julia listened, her silence a comfort before responding. "They don't deserve you," she said, her tone firm. "You're stronger than this." I leaned back, staring out the window as the resort faded from view. Julia's words grounded me, reminding me of the life I had built without their approval. Timothy's arrogance, his wife's smugness, my parents' cowardice. They thought they could erase me, but they were wrong. I had learned long ago to rely on myself, and this moment only sharpened that truth. "I'm not going back," I told Julia, my voice resolute. "I'm done playing their game." She agreed, suggesting I take a few days to clear my head before returning to Seattle. I nodded, though she couldn't see me already, mentally mapping my next steps. The taxi hummed along, carrying me toward the airport and away from the family that had never truly seen me. My phone buzzed again. Timothy this time, a message laced with mockery, as if he expected me to beg for a place at their table. I deleted it without reading the rest. I needed to talk to my grandmother, the one person who had always seen me for who I was. Helen answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and familiar, cutting through the hum of the road. "Isabella," she said, a warmth in her tone that felt like home. I took a deep breath, determined to keep my emotions in check, and began recounting what had happened at the Rosewood. I told her about the check-in counter, the clerk's confusion, and the absence of my name from the reservation list. I described how my parents had stood by their silence, a betrayal louder than words. Then I recounted my brother's words, his voice echoing in my mind. "The room is for me, my wife, and my daughter. We're the real family here." I kept my tone even, laying out the facts without pleading for sympathy. I didn't want pity. I wanted her to know the truth. Helen listened without interrupting, her breathing steady on the other end, but I could sense a shift, a quiet intensity building in her silence. When I finished, there was a pause long enough to make me wonder if the call had dropped. Then she spoke, her voice low but edged with steel. "They've gone too far this time," she said, each word deliberate. I could picture her sitting in her study, surrounded by books and ledgers, her sharp eyes narrowing. "I raised them better than this, or at least I tried." Her tone carried a mix of disappointment and resolve, a combination I had heard only a few times before, usually when she was about to take decisive action. She didn't raise her voice, but the weight of her words told me she was furious. I stayed quiet, letting her process. My grandmother had built her wealth through discipline and foresight, and she valued fairness above all. She had taught me those same principles when I was young, guiding me to stand on my own. Now, hearing about this slight, I knew she felt it personally, not just as my grandmother, but as someone who despised entitlement. "I'll handle this," she said finally, her voice calm but unyielding. "You focus on yourself, Isabella. Don't let their nonsense pull you down." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, feeling a flicker of relief. Helen didn't make promises lightly, and her words carried a certainty that something was about to change. I thanked her, keeping my response brief. "I'm heading to the airport," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be fine." She didn't press me for details or try to convince me to stay. Instead, she said, "Good. You've always known how to take care of yourself." The call ended and I leaned back in the taxi, the weight of the day still heavy but somehow lighter. My grandmother's reaction wasn't just about me, it was about the principle of it all. Timothy, his wife. My parents. They had crossed a line, and Helen wasn't one to let such things slide. The taxi driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, asking if I needed to stop anywhere before the airport. I shook my head, my mind already turning to the future. As I settled into a stiff chair at the airport gate, my phone buzzed relentlessly, a storm of notifications breaking the quiet hum of travelers around me. The screen lit up with my brother's name, followed by my mother's, then an email from my father. I let them pile up, each ping a reminder of the family I had just walked away from. Timothy's first message was sharp, accusing me of overreacting as if his words at the Rosewood were a harmless joke. "You're making a scene for nothing?" He wrote, his tone dripping with the same arrogance I had seen in the lobby. I swiped it away, unwilling to engage. My mother's texts came next, a flurry of half-hearted apologies mixed with deflections. "We didn't mean to upset you," she typed, followed by, "You should have stayed to talk it out." I scoffed, picturing her nervous fidgeting, her loyalty always tethered to my brother. My father's email was longer, a rambling attempt to justify their actions. He claimed the booking was a mix-up, but his words felt hollow, laced with the same excuses I had heard my whole life. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were scared of what might come next. Then came a voicemail from my brother's wife, Deborah, her voice syrupy and insincere. "Isabella, we're all family here," she said, as if her husband hadn't just declared me an outsider. "Come back, and we'll sort this out." I deleted it before she could finish her words, grating against the memory of her smug nod in the lobby. The lowest blow came when my phone buzzed again, this time with a voice message from my niece Sophie. Her small, hesitant voice asked Aunt Isabella, "Why did you leave? I miss you." My chest tightened, but I recognized the tactic. Timothy and his wife had put her up to it, using her innocence to pull me back into their web. I didn't respond, though it hurt to ignore her. Sophie wasn't to blame, but I couldn't let their manipulations sway me. I silenced my phone, tucking it into my pocket as I boarded the flight to Seattle. The cabin's low hum drowned out the chaos of their messages, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time in days, I could breathe without the weight of their expectations pressing down. I leaned back in my seat, my thoughts shifting to the life waiting for me at home. My apartment, my job, the quiet rhythm of my days. They were mine, built without their help or approval. The family drama felt distant now, like a storm I had finally escaped. When I landed in Seattle, the cool, damp air greeted me like an old friend. I took a cab to my apartment, the city lights blurring past as I checked my email for work updates. A project deadline loomed, and I welcomed the distraction. Numbers and spreadsheets were predictable, unlike the family I had left behind. I spent the evening reviewing reports, my focus sharpening with each task. My phone stayed silent, its notifications muted, but I knew they were still trying. A quick glance at my inbox showed 3 more emails from my father, each one more desperate than the last. "We need to talk," he wrote. "This is getting out of hand." I closed my laptop, refusing to let their panic pull me back. By the next morning, Timothy had sent a new round of messages, his tone shifting from smug to frantic. "You talked to Grandma, didn't you?" One read, his words betraying a crack in his usual confidence. I could almost see him pacing, realizing that his actions might have consequences he hadn't anticipated. His wife followed with another text, her words sharp and accusing. "You're stirring up trouble," she wrote, as if I were the one who had excluded myself. My parents' messages grew more insistent, urging me to call them to fix this. But I had no intention of fixing anything. They had made their choices, and I was done carrying the weight of their mistakes. I spent the day catching up on work, my inbox filling with client requests that demanded my attention. Each email I answered, each task I completed, felt like a step further from the chaos of the rosewood. My grandmother's promise echoed in my mind, a quiet assurance that she would handle things. I didn't know what she was planning, but I trusted her to act with the same precision she had always shown. As I walked to a nearby coffee shop, the familiar rhythm of Seattle grounding me, I felt lighter than I had in years. Their panic, their accusations, they were no longer my burden. 2 days after settling back in Seattle, I opened my laptop to find an email from my grandmother waiting in my inbox. The subject line was simple: family matters. My heart quickened, sensing the weight behind those words. I clicked it open, scanning the contents, and saw that Helen had copied me on a message addressed to my parents and my brother. Her words were precise, each sentence crafted with the authority of someone who had built an empire and knew how to wield its power. The email began with a calm acknowledgement of the incident at the Rosewood. Helen didn't mince words, calling out the deliberate exclusion of my name from the reservation list. "I have been informed of the events that transpired in Florida," she wrote, her tone measured but firm. "Such behavior is not only unacceptable, but a betrayal of the values I instilled in this family." My eyes lingered on that line, a quiet validation of the hurt I had carried. She went on to outline her decision, each point hitting like a hammer. Effective immediately, she was cutting all financial support and inheritance rights for my father, my mother, and Timothy. No trust funds, no annual stipends, no safety nets. The words landed heavily even through the screen. For Timothy, the consequences were specific and brutal. Helen revealed that she had been quietly covering the debts of his failing restaurant, a venture he had boasted about, but mismanaged into near collapse. "The restaurant's loans will no longer be subsidized," she wrote. "You will face the creditors on your own." I could almost see Timothy's face, his smug confidence crumbling as he realized his lavish lifestyle was at risk. His restaurant, a symbol of his inflated ego, was now a sinking ship, and Helen had just pulled the plug. My parents faced their own reckoning. Helen disclosed that their retirement fund, which they had relied on for years, was tied to her estate. With one stroke, she severed their access, leaving them to fend for themselves. She also withdrew her commitment to securing their place in a luxury assisted living facility they had bragged about to their friends. "You will need to make other arrangements." She wrote, her words cold and final. I imagined my mother clutching her phone, her usual composure cracking, and my father staring blankly, his excuses useless against Helen's resolve. As I read, a mix of emotions swirled inside me. There was no joy in their downfall, but a quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. For years I had been the outsider, dismissed while they basked in their entitlement. Now Helen's email was a mirror, forcing them to face the consequences of their choices. I wasn't mentioned in her decision, but being copied on the email felt like a nod, a recognition that I had been wronged and that justice was being served. I leaned back in my chair, the Seattle skyline visible through my window, and let out a slow breath. This was vindication, not vengeance, and it felt right. I closed the email knowing my family was likely reeling. Timothy would be scrambling to save his restaurant, probably calling in favors he didn't have. My parents would be recalculating their future, their dreams of a cushy retirement unraveling. I didn't need to see their reactions to know they were shaken. Helen's words were too precise, too final to leave room for doubt. My phone remained silent, a stark contrast to the barrage of messages from the day before. They weren't reaching out now, and I didn't expect them to. They were too busy grappling with the fallout. I turned my attention to my work, opening a spreadsheet for a client project. The numbers grounded me, their logic a refuge from the family chaos. Helen's decision hadn't changed my life. I had built my own path long ago, but it lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The years of being overlooked, of biting my tongue, felt acknowledged in her actions. I didn't need their apologies or their approval anymore. I had my grandmother's respect, and that was enough. As I worked, I thought about what might come next. Helen wasn't done, she never left things half-finished. Her email hinted at further steps, a restructuring of her estate that would likely ripple through the family for years. I didn't know the details, but I trusted her to handle it with the same clarity she had shown in her message. For now, I was content to stay out of the fray, letting their world shift while I held steady in mine. The city outside hummed with life, and I felt more at home than ever, ready for whatever lay ahead. 2 weeks after my grandmother's email, I met Julia at a quiet cafe near my apartment. The city's drizzle pattered against the windows as we settled into a corner, booth cups of coffee steaming between us. My phone, still muted from the barrage of family messages, sat face down on the table. Julia leaned forward, her eyes sharp with curiosity, and asked to see the latest emails from my family. I handed her my tablet, knowing she'd help me make sense of their unraveling. Julia scrolled through the messages, her brow furrowing as she read. My brother had sent a long email, his usual bravado replaced by a desperate plea. He described how he and his wife were forced to list their sprawling suburban house for sale, the one they had flaunted at every family gathering. The restaurant's collapse had drained their savings and creditors were circling. "We had to pull Sophie from her private academy," he wrote, his words tinged with shame. "She's starting at a public school next month." I pictured my niece, her backpack slung over one shoulder, stepping into an unfamiliar classroom. It stung, but Timothy's choices had led them here, not mine. My parents' emails were bleaker. My father wrote about their move to a cramped one-bedroom apartment, a far cry from the elegant home they had once maintained. "We're cutting corners where we can," he admitted, detailing the medical bills piling up, without the cushion of my grandmother's support. My mother's message was shorter, her tone bitter. "You could have stopped this," she wrote, as if I had orchestrated their downfall. I felt a flicker of guilt, but Julia's voice cut through it. "They're blaming you for their own mess," she said, setting the tablet down. "Don't let them drag you back." Julia's clarity grounded me. We dissected the emails together, her sharp insights peeling back the layers of manipulation. Timothy's message tried to paint him as a victim, but Julia pointed out his refusal to take responsibility. "He's still acting like he's entitled to Helen's money," she said, shaking her head. My parents' words, she noted, were heavy with resentment, not remorse. "They're not sorry for what they did," she said. "They're just mad about the consequences." Her words echoed my own thoughts, solidifying my resolve to keep my distance. As we talked, I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through me. Seattle's gray skies felt comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos my family was facing. I had read about Timothy's house in a real estate listing, its price slashed to attract buyers. The image of their once pristine lawn, now neglected, flashed in my mind. My parents' new reality was just as stark. Without Helen's backing, they were juggling doctor visits and prescriptions on a tight budget. I didn't revel in their struggles, but I couldn't ignore the justice in it. They had built their lives on favoritism, and now those foundations were crumbling. Julia leaned back, her expression softening. "You're doing the right thing by staying out of it," she said. "You've got your own life here." She was right. My apartment, my job, my routines. They were steady, untouched by the family's collapse. I had spent years carving out this space free from their expectations. The emails, though painful to read, were proof that I didn't need them to thrive. I thanked Julia, her support a lifeline as always. We finished our coffee, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, her latest project, a new bookstore opening nearby. Back at my apartment, I glanced at my phone, tempted to check for new messages. Instead, I set it aside, opening my laptop to tackle a work proposal. The rhythm of typing steadied me, each keystroke a reminder of my independence. My family's world was falling apart, but mine held firm. Timothy, his wife, and my parents were grappling with choices they could no longer outrun. Sophie, caught in their mess, was the only one I felt for, but I knew reaching out would pull me back into their orbit. I wasn't ready for that. Not now, maybe, not ever. A month after meeting Julia at the cafe, I walked into my office greeted by a surprise from my boss. She called me into her office, a wide smile on her face, and offered me a promotion to senior analyst. The role came with a corner office raise and more responsibility, exactly the kind of challenge I thrived on. I accepted without hesitation, feeling a surge of pride as I shook her hand. Years of late nights and meticulous work had paid off, and this moment was mine, earned through my own effort, not family connections. Back at my desk, I sent a quick text to Julia sharing the news. "You're killing it," she replied, her enthusiasm infectious even through the screen. I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support. My life in Seattle had settled into a rhythm that felt right: workouts, and weekends exploring the city's markets or hiking trails. The chaos of the Rosewood and my family's fallout seemed like a distant memory, though the lessons lingered sharp and clear. That evening, I headed to a meeting of my investment club, a group of friends who gathered monthly to discuss stocks, bonds, and financial strategies. The meeting was held in a cozy community center, its walls lined with bookshelves and warm lighting. I arrived early, setting up my laptop to share my latest portfolio updates. My investments, carefully chosen over years of research, were yielding steady returns. I had diversified into tech startups and green energy moves that had initially raised eyebrows, but were now paying dividends. The club members trickled in, their faces familiar and welcoming. As we settled around a long table, the conversation turned personal. One member, a software engineer named Rachel, asked about my recent trip. I hesitated, then decided to share. I told them about the incident at the Rosewood, how my family had left me without a room, and the chain of events that followed. I kept my tone matter of fact, focusing on the facts rather than the emotions. My brother declared his family the priority, I said, recalling his words in the lobby. It was a wake-up call, but it pushed me to rely on myself. The group listened intently, their expressions a mix of shock and admiration. Rachel leaned forward, her eyes wide. "You walked away from that?" she asked. I nodded, explaining how I had returned to Seattle and cut contact with my family. I mentioned my grandmother's intervention, though I kept the details vague, not wanting to dwell on their consequences. The focus was on my choice to move forward, to build a life free from their expectations. Julia, who had joined the club a year ago, chimed in. "Isabella's always been the one to chart her own course," she said, her voice firm. "She didn't let their drama define her." Her words carried weight, and I felt a warmth spread through me. The group nodded, and the conversation shifted to strategies for financial independence, a topic that resonated deeply. I shared my approach to budgeting and investing, emphasizing discipline and patience. The others chimed in with their own tips, creating a lively exchange that left me energized. As the meeting wrapped up, Julia pulled me aside. "You're stronger for this," she said, her eyes steady. "Don't let anyone make you doubt that." I thanked her, appreciating how she always knew when to push me to stay true to myself. We walked out into the cool Seattle evening, the city's skyline glowing against the dusk. I felt a sense of freedom, unburdened by the need for my family's approval. My promotion, my investments, my friends, they were proof of a life I had built on my own terms. Back at my apartment, I reviewed my portfolio, tweaking a few allocations before bed. The numbers were reassuring, a testament to years of careful planning. I thought briefly about my family, wondering how they were navigating their new reality. But the thought passed quickly. The past had shaped me, but it no longer held me. As I turned off the light, I felt ready for whatever came next, confident in the path I had chosen. A few weeks after my investment club meeting, I settled into my apartment after a long workday, my laptop open on the kitchen counter. An email from my brother popped up, its subject line, a stark, "I'm sorry." My fingers hesitated over the keyboard, but I clicked to read it. Timothy's words were softer than I expected, admitting his mistake in excluding me from the family trip at the Rosewood. "I didn't think it would hurt you like this," he wrote, his tone almost sincere. But as I read on, his apology shifted, mentioning the pressure of his failing restaurant as if it excused his actions. The words felt rehearsed, a plea to regain favor rather than a genuine reckoning. My phone lit up with notifications drawing my attention. My mother had sent a series of texts, each one a reluctant attempt at an apology. "We never meant for things to spiral," she wrote, but her next message cut deeper. "If you hadn't told your grandmother, we wouldn't be in this mess." My father's text followed, brief and sharp. "We're sorry, but you pushed us away," he said, twisting their regret into my fault. Their messages echoed a familiar tactic, half apologies wrapped in blame, now tinged with desperation. They mentioned reaching out to my grandmother, hoping she'd reconsider her decision to cut their financial support. I stared at the screen, my chest tight with old wounds. Needing clarity, I picked up my phone and dialed my grandmother. Helen answered after 2 rings, her voice calm but resolute. "Isabella," she said warmly, a steadiness in her tone that grounded me. I asked if my family had contacted her, and she confirmed they had. Timothy had written a long email, she said, full of excuses about the restaurant's collapse. My parents had called their apologies laced with pleas for her to restore their funds. "They're sorry for the consequences, not for what they did to you." Helen said, her words sharp and unflinching. She told me she had refused their requests, her decision final. "They made their choices," she added. "You don't owe them anything." Her words settled over me, a validation of the path I had chosen. I thanked her, my voice steady, and hung up. Alone in my apartment, I reread Timothy's email and my parents' texts. Their regret was hollow, a last-ditch effort to claw back what they had lost. I thought of the lobby at the Rosewood, where my brother had dismissed me without a second thought. Their apologies now were not about me, they were about saving themselves. I felt no urge to respond, no pull to mend what was broken. I opened my laptop's settings, my fingers moving with purpose. I blocked Timothy's email address, then my parents' phone numbers. Each click felt like a release, a shedding of expectations I had long outgrown. My brother, his wife, my parents. They were part of a chapter I was ready to close. My niece Sophie flickered in my mind, an innocent caught in their mistakes. I felt a twinge of sorrow for her, but reaching out would only reopen old wounds. I let the thought pass, knowing it was the right choice for now. Standing by the window, I looked out at the city lights, their glow a quiet comfort. The weight of my family's drama lifted, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt before. Helen's resolve mirrored my own, a reminder that I didn't need their approval to thrive. My job, my investments, my life, they were mine, built without their influence. The Rosewood incident had been a painful lesson, but it had freed me from their shadow. I returned to my laptop, pulling up a work report. The familiar task of organizing data and setting goals grounded me. My family's belated regrets, their failed pleas to Helen, were their burden, not mine. As I worked, the silence of my apartment felt peaceful, a space where I could focus on what mattered. I had walked away from their chaos once, and now I was doing it again, this time with no looking back. A month after blocking my family's contacts, I found a package waiting at my doorstep on my birthday. The small box bore my grandmother's elegant handwriting, and I smiled as I carried it inside. Opening it, I discovered a hardcover book on advanced investment strategies, its pages crisp and untouched. Tucked inside was a note from Helen, her words concise yet warm. "Keep building your future, Isabella. You're already on the right path." I traced my fingers over the cover, grateful for her quiet support. She hadn't just given me a gift. She had reaffirmed my choices, her faith in me, a steady anchor. I placed the book on my desk next to my laptop where I tracked my investments. My portfolio had grown stronger, each decision a step toward the financial independence I valued. My new role as senior analyst kept me engaged, the challenges sharpening my focus. Outside of work, I filled my days with small joys, morning runs, dinners with friends, quiet evenings reading. The turmoil of the rosewood felt like a distant chapter, its lessons etched into my perspective. I had learned to prioritize my self-respect over the fleeting approval of others. As I flipped through Helen's book, my thoughts drifted to the past. The trip had exposed my family's favoritism, a truth I could no longer ignore. Their actions, my brother's dismissal, my parents' indifference had pushed me to stand alone. But that moment of betrayal had also revealed my strength. I didn't need their validation to thrive. I never had. The realization was freeing, a weight lifted from years of trying to fit into their expectations. Financial independence, I understood now, was more than numbers in an account. It was the power to live on my own terms. My gaze fell on a small velvet pouch in my desk drawer, a gift I had bought months ago for my niece Sophie. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, its pendant a tiny star chosen because she loved stargazing as a child. I had planned to give it to her someday, but not now. She was still young, caught in the fallout of her parents' choices. Contacting her would mean stepping back into a world I had left behind. Instead, I tucked the pouch away, a promise to myself that I'd reach out when she was older, when she could understand my absence. For now, keeping my distance was the kindest choice I could make. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights casting a soft glow through the window. The path I had chosen wasn't easy, but it was mine. The Rosewood incident had been a turning point, not because of what my family did, but because of what I discovered about myself. I had walked away from their chaos and built a life rooted in my own values. Helen's gift, Sophie's necklace, my steady routines. They were reminders of who I was and who I wanted to be. Closing the book, I felt a quiet resolve. Living authentically meant letting go of those who couldn't respect me. My family's apologies, their regrets, their struggles, they were no longer my burden. I had my work, my goals, my future. As I turned off the lamp, the room settled into darkness, but I felt no fear. I was exactly where I belonged, grounded in the truth of my own worth.